Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to another session on IR Simplified. So today we are going to discuss the Saudi-Pakistan Nexus and what are its implications on India's interests. Because recently, just a few days ago, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have signed the Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement. Through this agreement, these two countries have formalized their defense relationship. Essentially, in return for the funds that Saudi provides to Pakistan, Pakistan is willing to create a collective security arrangement where both countries promise to each other that they will assist the other country if there is an aggression against one of them. This also allows Saudi Arabia to potentially access Pakistan's nuclear arsenal and provides the nuclear deterrence for Saudi Arabia. So this has greater implications for the geopolitics of West Asia region, especially at a time when the region is already going through a deep crisis. In the context of the Gaza war and Israel's repeated aggression against multiple Arab countries, this development, it raises the stakes and it creates the potential for greater divisions to come up in West Asian geopolitics. Given that Iran has been using its proxy groups, extremist terror organizations, which are known to target Israeli American interests. And given how Israel has been retaliating against this, the region is already witnessing a lot of chaos and instability. So, such a military pact between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, with a potential involvement of nuclear weapons, it simply raises the stakes in the West Asia region. So, this has greater implications for American interests as well. Because Saudi Arabia until now had depended heavily on American military support to protect Saudi interests and the interests of the Sunni powers. But of late, we are seeing the diminishing role of US. The security guarantees that US had provided to the Sunni powers led by Saudi Arabia has been on the decline, and the Arab states are no longer convinced that US is going to come to their defense if at all things escalate with Israel. So all these developments which are occurring at a rapid pace, it has very serious implications on Indian interests. So in this class today, this is exactly what we are going to discuss. The focus of the discussion would be on the history of Saudi-Pak relations. Let's get a brief idea regarding the close strategic ties that exist between the two Sunni powers. We will talk about India-Saudi relations as well. Because if we have to evaluate the impact of this security agreement on India and how it can impact the West Asia region, we have to break down India's relations with Saudi Arabia as well. Because according to some analysts and experts, this agreement may not have much of a negative impact on India. Some experts believe that it is highly unlikely for Saudi Arabia to take an anti-India position. But there are some who also believe that this could change our equation with Pakistan. We may have to factor the Saudi angle whenever there is an escalation of tensions with Pakistan. So that is what we need to understand in today's class. What would be the impact of this mutual defense agreement that Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have signed? How will it affect West Asia? What would be its impact on India? Now, before we start the discussion, I have an important announcement. If you're looking to enroll for our online classes, Unacademy has reduced the subscription fee as part of the Navratri season. Now you can subscribe to our courses at just 19,999, and I'm told that this is a limited period offer. And if you enroll within the offer period, you will also get up to 6 to 18 months of free extension on your subscription, along with CSE Assure Guarantee. What is the CSE Assure Guarantee? Let's say you don't clear prelims for some reason. And if you meet these criterias listed over here, Unacademy will extend your course for free so that you can prepare for the next attempt. So if you're interested to enroll, click on the link provided in the video description. So with this, let's begin our discussion and let's start with the history of Pakistan's relationship with Saudi Arabia. See, the two countries share a historical relationship that is rooted in cultural and religious connection. Saudi Arabia is the leader of the Sunni world when it comes to the Islamic nations and the Islamic world. Pakistan, which essentially became a Sunni theological state post partition, post independence, has naturally aligned with Saudi Arabia. In fact, post partition, Pakistan made deliberate attempts in the 1950s to disassociate itself from its Islamic connection with India, which was a more moderate strand of Islam. And it has tried to attach itself with the slightly more extremist, radicalized version, which you often find in West Asia, particularly in the Sunni countries. Pakistan has more openly embraced the Wahhabist, Salafist school of thought, which Saudi Arabia has been known to back and support. Now, I'm sure all of you are aware that Saudi Arabia remains a monarchy, an authoritarian state. The official name of the country itself is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So, the king, the crown prince, the sheikhs, they hold all the power in Saudi Arabia. And Pakistan's ruling elite, they have always been very, very close to the monarchy. Be it Pakistani leaders, prime ministers, presidents, and more importantly, the army chiefs and top generals, they have always shared a very, very close relationship with the leaders of Saudi Arabia. This personal angle brings the two countries even more closer. And don't forget the cultural angle as well. The Hajj pilgrimage, which is sacred to Muslims around the world, the most sacred religious site, Mecca, then as well as Medina, both are in Saudi Arabia. And this forms a strong cultural link between the two countries as well. Apart from this, they have built a very close strategic, defense, economic relationship, which we are going to discuss and explore in today's class. So I think the first point must be clear for all of you. The two countries, they share a lot in common, especially as a result of their common religious links, cultural heritage, and the close ties between the leadership. This is what binds the two countries together, and their strategic relationship goes back all the way till 1950s, 1960s. So let's see how Pakistan has built its presence, especially its military presence in Saudi Arabia. See, in 1960s, there was a major crisis in West Asia. It was in the country of Yemen, where a civil war had broken out. Now, if you're familiar with the map of West Asia, you would know that Yemen is a neighboring country of Saudi Arabia and it faces the Gulf of Aden towards the Arabian Sea. So, Saudi Arabia has always believed that its security depends on the stability in Yemen. So, when Yemen descended into a civil war in 1960s, Egypt stepped into this conflict and it had deployed its security forces in Yemen. So, what was this civil war all about? In Yemen, the civil war was a result of a power struggle between the royalists, the royal camp, which supported the monarchy, and the Republicans, who wanted to transform the country into a Republican state. So, the royal camp of Yemen, they were backed by Saudi Arabia, obviously. Saudi Arabia itself was a monarchy, and as well as Western interests, US, Israel, Britain, they were all backing the royalists in Yemen. Whereas Egypt, which itself had undergone a transformation based on nationalist ideology and transformed into a republican state under the leadership of the legendary Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt gave direct support to the Republicans who were looking to topple the monarchy, and Egypt even deployed its military in Yemen. So, this escalation of the conflict was seen as a threat by Saudi Arabia. But at that point in 1960s, Saudi Arabia was not a formidable military power. So it relied on its close partner Pakistan to provide some military troops. And since then, informally, Pakistani military has had a presence in Saudi Arabia. Pakistani soldiers were deployed in the conflict on behalf of Saudi Arabia in collaboration with Saudi Arabia. Then in 1979, there was an even bigger crisis, the seizure of the Grand Mosque in Mecca. At the most sacred site in Islam, militants, they tried to seize the Grand Mosque, presenting the biggest crisis for Saudi Arabia at that point. So during this rescue operation, while fighting the militants, Saudi Arabia relied upon Pakistani special forces who were brought in to tackle the crisis. So Pakistani special forces played a role in liberating the Grand Mosque, which had been seized by the militants. So this again was a result of the complex extremist regional and religion-based rivalries that exist in West Asia. There were allegations and conspiracy theories as well that US and Israel were backing these militants to trigger a crisis in Saudi Arabia. So the point to understand here is that in the past, whenever Saudi Arabia faced a major security challenge, Pakistan is the one which has been helping out Saudi Arabia. Be it the civil war in Yemen or be it the seizure of the Grand Mosque in Mecca. In both these instances, it was Pakistan which cemented its role as a security provider to Saudi Arabia. So, this is the origin of the strong defense partnership between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. That's why I want you to know this part of history. Even if you don't remember all the details, it's okay. Just remember these two events, just the incidents which allowed Pakistan to play a role and essentially place its troops in Saudi Arabia. In 1982, they formalized this defense partnership by signing the Bilateral Security Cooperation Agreement. Under this agreement, both countries have a very close collaboration in the defense domain. They take part in joint training, joint military exercises. In fact, Saudi Arabia would even go on to purchase arms and weapons from Pakistan as well. And all the while, Saudi Arabia would keep on funding Pakistan. It would invest in the country, fund religious institutions, charitable institutions, provide large donations, which eventually would be basically taken off by the Pakistani elite class. It would even provide the much needed financial support whenever Pakistan's economy faced a crisis. It would even go on to fund Pakistan's military modernization, and allegedly, Saudi Arabia has also funded Pakistan's nuclear program. So, this is the extent of their close collaboration. Now, if you look at how Saudi Arabia was involved in the promotion of radical religion based extremism in the region, this is what is shocking and quite concerning for India. In 1979, at the time when the seizure of the Mecca mosque had happened, following this crisis, Saudi Arabia had decided that it had to establish itself as the leading Islamic state, as the leading Sunni power of the region. So parallelly, a crisis presented itself in Afghanistan when Soviet Union invaded the country. When USSR invaded Afghanistan during the Cold War to protect its communist influence and counter the Western democratic influence, the United States worked with Pakistan to launch a covert proxy war. I hope all of you have attended my class yesterday as well. So even yesterday we spoke about this development, the involvement of US and Pakistan in sponsoring the Afghan Mujahideen to wage an insurgent war against the occupying Soviet forces. How Pakistan's ISI received support, weapons from the US, from the CIA to train and radicalize the Afghan Mujahideen along the Af-Pak border and use the Afghan Mujahideen to target the Soviet forces. So during this covert proxy war in Afghanistan, which was mainly funded by the US, Saudi Arabia was also very actively involved. Given its dislike of Soviet Union, as Soviet Union being a communist state was atheist, Saudi Arabia being a theological monarchy, it wanted to aggressively promote religion-based ideology and philosophy across the region. So Saudi Arabia started getting involved in funding religious institutions, madrasas, charitable institutions, particularly in Pakistan. A large part of the funds that Saudi was providing, it would basically land in the hands of extremist organizations as well. So this is where the allegation comes up that Saudi Arabia has been complicit in the sponsorship of radicalism and extremism. But there are others who dispute this argument. They say that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was not officially funding these organizations. Rather, it was individual donors in Saudi Arabia who sympathized with the cause of Wahhabism and Salafism, who wanted to promote a more rigid strand of Islam. It was these individual donors and entities that were funding the institutions in Pakistan. But nevertheless, whether it was the state of Saudi Arabia or individual donors and non state entities, eventually the fact is that from Saudi Arabia, there has been extensive funding for religious institutions. And in the name of promoting religion and charitable activities, there has been a diversion of those funds towards promoting radicalism and extremism as well. In fact, we have seen this problem across India's neighborhood as well. For example, in countries like Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in Maldives, even in Myanmar, several madrasas and religious institutions have received funding from Saudi based donors, which has led to the promotion of a very radical and rigid strand of Islam, the Wahhabist Salafist school of thought, which is the basic foundational ideology of most of the terrorist organizations in the world. So, this remains a concern for countries like India. The Saudi-Pak Nexus, the Saudi involvement in essentially funding such institutions and madrasas, which have had a role in promoting extremist and radical ideology. So, this again kept the two countries closer throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Then, the biggest connection between Saudi and Pakistan is through the nuclear weapons program of Pakistan. So, here I would like to tell you a very interesting anecdote. There is a very popular book called War, written by a well known American journalist. This book, it refers to one particular incident where a US senator who was visiting Saudi Arabia, he met with the crown prince, the popular MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, and he was having an interaction with him. The US senator asked Saudi Arabia that, are you interested in uranium? Would you look to procure uranium to focus on nuclear technology? So, to this question asked by the US senator, MBS replies that, why would I buy uranium? I don't need uranium. If I want, I will directly buy Pakistan's nuclear weapons. So, this again brings up this theory that Saudi Arabia has always seen Pakistan to be providing a nuclear umbrella to Saudi Arabia and the Sunni powers in the region. So, there is some element of truth in this, because in the 80s, even Indian intelligence agencies had information to believe that Saudi Arabia was quite actively involved in channeling some funds towards the militarization of Pakistan. Because if Pakistan could become a stronger military power, if Pakistan could eventually get hold of nuclear weapons, it would obviously benefit Saudi Arabia as well. Given their strong linkages, Saudi Arabia has always been quite certain that Pakistan's nuclear weapons are as good as Saudi nuclear weapons. That's where this statement comes up, that Saudi Arabia doesn't believe in building a weapon. Maybe it knows that it can buy a nuclear bomb if it really wants from Pakistan, which would be more than willing probably to provide that nuclear umbrella to Saudi Arabia. It's like our Indian companies. Buy, don't build. Instead of building everything on your own, buy what is readily available in the market. So Saudi Arabia has allegedly followed this strategy. Because see, in West Asia, you need to understand the regional dynamics there. In West Asia, Israel already possesses nuclear weapons. It's an undeclared nuclear weapon state, though it has never tested its nuclear weapons. Right? It's a well-known open secret that Israel does possess nuclear weapons. So as a result, Iran tried to build a deterrence, and Iran started pursuing a nuclear weapons program from 1979. So obviously, when Israel and Iran were pursuing nuclear weapons, don't you think Saudi Arabia would have also given it a thought? Because see, don't forget, the Shia powers led by Iran share rivalry with the Sunni powers led by Saudi Arabia. This is part of the sectarian divide in Islam. The sectarian divide in Islam gets reflected in West Asian geopolitics, where the Shia Sunni powers have been divided on ideological lines. and share intense rivalry with each other. So when Iran would have started pursuing nuclear weapons, obviously Saudi Arabia would have been alarmed and it would have realized that Pakistan is the one which can probably help out Saudi Arabia. So Saudi option is very clear that provide the money that Pakistan needs, keep Pakistan's economy afloat, keep good relations with the Pakistani leadership. And when the time arises, if at all the need arises, Saudi Arabia would always bank on Pakistan to provide that nuclear cover. It's like an insurance policy that Saudi Arabia was investing in, probably. So now, this speculation is almost coming true. It's almost becoming formal through this new security agreement that has been signed. So the Mutual Defense Pact, it probably includes the nuclear cover as well. And you might be aware of this controversial statement that was issued by Pakistan's defense minister, which went viral on social media. After this new security agreement was signed, Pakistan's defense minister stated that if Saudi Arabia wants our nuclear weapons, we are more than happy to share some of it with Saudi Arabia. Now, who speaks in such a casual manner about weapons of mass destruction? That's why the controversy and the criticism against the statement of the Pakistani defense minister. Now, you might ask, why is Pakistan obligated to Saudi Arabia? Why would Pakistan be convinced to provide military support and troops to fight Saudi wars or to provide security to Saudi Arabia and share maybe nuclear weapons if necessary? Why would Pakistan do that? That's because Pakistan has a great deal of economic and strategic dependency. As you all know, Pakistan has been a military state. Right from independence, it has been obsessed with targeting India. It has been obsessed with the Kashmir issue. It has gone through multiple military coups where the military has dominated the political landscape. And it's a well-known fact that there is a duality of power in Pakistan. The civilian government is just for the sake of it. Elections are just for the sake of it. The entire political arrangement, including that of elections, is largely controlled by the deep state of Pakistan, the army and the ISI. All the big strategic decisions related to foreign policy, security, nuclear weapons program, even decisions related to Pakistani economy, they are largely taken by the deep state or in the interest of the deep state. So Pakistan, which has focused on militarization, building weapons, and keeping its rivalry with India, and even sponsoring terrorism against India as a state policy, it has obviously exhausted its resources. Pakistan may not be able to provide power or education or good healthcare and jobs, but Pakistan has managed to build a very formidable armed force with a nuclear arsenal, thanks to the support from China, thanks to the ignorance of the United States. So, Pakistan would essentially be willing to trade security for money, funds for weapons. Pakistan is more than happy to do that. And also, don't forget, since Pakistan is not able to create jobs for its people, it's not able to provide good education to its citizens. Millions of Pakistanis are leaving the country, working in other countries in West Asia, such as Saudi Arabia. There is a very strong Pakistani diaspora in Saudi Arabia. 2.6 million plus Pakistanis are working in Saudi Arabia, right? In the hospitality industry, construction, oil sector, doing blue collar jobs, essentially, the low paying jobs where low skills are required. So millions of Pakistanis are dependent on Saudi Arabia for their livelihood. Their families are dependent on it. So Pakistan has a great deal of dependency on the Saudi economy. And Pakistan, which has diverted all its resources towards militarization and its obsession with India and Kashmir, it has completely forgotten its economic challenges and obligations. Every now and then, Pakistan has faced multiple economic crisis situations, especially in the last few years itself. I'm sure you would be hearing that Pakistan is on the verge of bankruptcy, right? Pakistan has received the maximum number of IMF bailouts compared to any other country. Throughout the last 7 decades, Pakistan has gone with a begging bowl to IMF, Western countries, and countries like Saudi and UAE, asking for funds and assistance to sustain its economy and to overcome the liquidity crisis. It has borrowed heavy debt from multiple partners, including China, which is another all weather friend. So, trust me, if Pakistan's economy has survived for so long, it has to thank three countries in particular. And I've mentioned all the three over here: China, Saudi, UAE. Without their support and funding for many years, Pakistan's economy would have crashed long ago. Now, there are other donors as well, like Turkey. Turkey is also known of late to be supporting and backing the Pakistani economy. So, this is the reason why Pakistan feels obligated. It is trading money for weapons, funds for security. Now, in this context, don't you think Saudi Arabia would be more inclined towards Pakistan and support Pakistan on important matters like Kashmir? This was Saudi position before 2010. Whenever Pakistan tried to internationalize the Kashmir issue, when it would try to bring the Kashmir issue at United Nations or at the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in order to target India, to isolate India, it would allege that India is committing human right violations in Jammu and Kashmir. So when Pakistan would run such campaigns, such propaganda at the global level, countries like Saudi Arabia were willingly backing Pakistan. They would vote against India as well before 2010. They would vote in favor of Pakistan. So this has been the kind of equation that has existed between them. But post 2010, there is a big shift in Saudi foreign policy, which we are going to discuss in a short while. The Saudi position on Kashmir, on Pakistan, on India has gone through a fundamental shift, a paradigm shift after 2010. So we will discuss this paradigm shift in a short while when we cover India-Saudi relations. So please keep this in mind. But I think this will help you easily understand why Saudi-Pakistan share such a close partnership. Why is there so much trust between them? Now, shall we look at the provisions of the security agreement that was signed last week? The Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement. What are the provisions of this agreement? Under this agreement, both countries have taken up a commitment. They have adopted the principle of collective defense. The principle of collective defense is something that you find in the NATO. The Washington Convention, which established the NATO, consists of Article number 5, which outlines this principle of collective defense. So NATO countries, they strictly follow this principle. They basically treat an act of aggression against a fellow NATO member as an act of aggression against all the NATO members. And they collectively will organize defense to protect their other members. So if a non-NATO country were to attack a NATO country, all the NATO members would come together to the defense of that NATO nation. This is the principle of collective defense. This principle has been invoked only once. That is after the 9/11 attacks, when US declared a global war on terrorism. All the NATO allies came together to form an international coalition force to invade Afghanistan and to topple the Taliban regime. So a similar principle is now being incorporated in a formal manner. Maybe such an arrangement always existed informally because Pakistan has had a military presence in Saudi from 1960s itself. But now a formal shape is being given to this through this agreement that they will treat an attack on each other as an attack on themselves, and they will come to the support, the defense of the other country. Any act of aggression against either country shall be considered an aggression against both. This is the exact wording that is present in this agreement, which was made public by both Saudi and Pakistan. It also has other provisions for closer military engagement between the two. They are going to establish a permanent coordination mechanism. So such a mechanism between the armed forces and intelligence agencies of Saudi and Pakistan could potentially help. It could potentially help them to plan and conduct joint operations if necessary. So when there is a joint coordination mechanism, they could essentially manage the day-to-day developments of a war or a conflict in which they are involved, coordinate their efforts, and promote interoperability between their forces. So this would facilitate joint real-world military operations between the armed forces of both the countries. They are setting up a joint military committee to support their planning, their strategic decision making, and they are setting up a formal intelligence sharing arrangement. This, of course, existed even before, but as I said, they're formalizing it and providing a clear structure for intelligence sharing between the two countries. The ISI has a very, very active presence in Saudi Arabia. It has very good links with Saudi intelligence. So they will cement this relationship between the intelligence agencies as well, and they will further expand military training exercises. See, for example, Saudi Air Force pilots, they were initially trained by Pakistani Air Force from 1960s and 70s onwards. So there is a close collaboration between them with regard to military training. They have naval training exercises as well, right? They have counterterrorism exercises and training missions between them. So this would be further expanded under the new mutual defense agreement that they have signed. So why is this agreement signed now? Why is the timing so important? What brought these countries together to formally sign such a pact? Right? There must have been some push, some trigger. Experts believe that such an agreement was being negotiated from a long time, from at least 1 year. Because ever since October 7, 2023, things have completely changed in West Asia. After Hamas carried out the brutal attack against Israel, Israel has retaliated with brutal aggression in Gaza, and it has went on to target multiple countries, Arab nations in the region. Israel has been resorting to extreme force, and it is even taking the risk of destabilizing the whole region by expanding the war, not just across the Palestinian territories in Gaza and West Bank to target Hamas, but it has targeted Hezbollah in Lebanon. It has taken the war to Syria. It has carried out multiple strikes on the Houthis in Yemen, and it has even carried out direct strikes against Iran, which is the primary sponsorer of all these proxies, be it Hamas, be it Hezbollah, be it the Houthis, or even the former regime in Syria under then President Assad. These entities were essentially Iranian proxies. It was part of Iran's covert proxy war to counter Israel, given the enmity between Israel and Iran. So, as Israel has stepped up its aggression, it has discarded international law. It is accused of committing a genocide and war crimes in Gaza against Palestinians. Israel has shown no restraint at all. And just few days back, it crossed all the limits by launching a direct attack against Qatar. In Doha, where the Hamas leadership is based out of, where the peace talks are being held between Israel and Hamas, which is mediated by Egypt and Qatar and United States. Israel took a direct aim at the Hamas leadership, trying to wipe them out, that too in the capital city of a friendly foreign country. Israel Qatar have a arrangement between them. So Israel blatantly violated the sovereignty of a Arab nation, carried out a direct airstrike. So this is something which has shocked every other country in West Asia, from Turkey to Kuwait to Qatar, Bahrain, then UAE and Saudi Arabia. All of them are extremely alarmed and worried. So Egypt, along with UAE, they tried bringing all the Arab nations together to form a collective alliance against the hostility that Israel is showing in the region. There has been a proposal to transform the Gulf Cooperation Council into sort of a military alliance, which could at least protect the Gulf nations. But Saudi Arabia has moved away from all these arrangements which were being discussed, and it has signed this new agreement with Pakistan right after Israel's attacks in Doha. So, what does that tell us? The message is very clear. The Saudi deal with Pakistan is a direct response to what Israel has done in Qatar, to what Israel has done across West Asia, the blatant attacks violating the sovereignty of multiple nations. So Saudi Arabia is trying to secure its own interests because Saudi Arabia knows that US is not able to rein in Israel. In fact, the Trump administration has been openly advocating that Israel should continue the conflict and achieve its desired objectives. See, just a few years ago, things were very different in West Asia. The United States, under Trump's first presidency, it had championed a set of peace accords known as the Abraham Accords. In 2020, the US championed the Abraham Accords, and it was signed by United Arab Emirates with Israel, with UAE recognizing Israel and setting up formal diplomatic relations with Israel. Now, this was a groundbreaking development because until then, only two Arab countries had recognized Israel, that is, Egypt and Jordan. They had recognized Israel in the 80s and 90s largely because of compulsion. They had lost wars with Israel, they were pressurized by the US. So, Egypt, to get back the Sinai Desert, which Israel had captured, was forced to sign the Camp David Accords in 1979. Then Jordan, which also had been pushed back by Israel, which was dealing with the burden of Palestinian refugees, was forced by the US to sign a peace treaty with Israel and recognize Israel. So these were the only two countries in the Islamic world, particularly from the Arab region, to have set up ties with Israel until then. So UAE, a major power, became the third Arab nation to recognize Israel and set up ties with the country through the Abraham Accords. This was later signed by Bahrain. Bahrain, by the way, is a very close ally of Saudi Arabia, meaning Saudi Arabia dictates the foreign policy for Bahrain. Bahrain would never do anything that would go against the interests of Saudi Arabia. So if UAE and Bahrain could sign the accords and set up relations with Israel, the message was Saudi Arabia had blessed the accord. Without Saudi blessing, Abraham Accords couldn't have gone through. Because all the Sunni powers here, they look up to Saudi Arabia for leadership. Saudi and UAE, they coordinate together in their foreign policy. So without Saudi approval, the Abraham Accords would not have happened. And by 2022-2023, there was speculation that Saudi Arabia itself might sign the Abraham Accords and recognize Israel and set up ties with Israel. So this also explains why the IMEC project was announced in 2023 at the G20 summit that was hosted by India. Because US, Saudi, India, Israel, they knew that normalization was happening in the region. If Saudi were to recognize Israel and set up formal ties, that would have been the biggest development in West Asian geopolitics. Now, just prior to the October 7th attacks, China had mediated between Iran and Saudi, and it had achieved a detente, a sort of a peace, a truce between the Shia and the Sunni power bloc. So, on one hand, American influence had stagnated or declined. Though it was championing the Abraham Accords and trying to bring around a transformation, its overall military diplomatic influence was on the decline. China's role was increasing day by day, and complete reset of relations were happening. So the October 7th attack changed everything for West Asia. Since then, we have seen that the US has not been able to deal with the security challenges in the region. Rather, it is unwilling. It doesn't want to take up a greater security role because right now America's focus is in Indo-Pacific to counter China and as well as counter Russia since the Ukraine war began. So US is right now not so interested in getting directly involved in West Asia's security problems. So it has basically given a free hand to Israel. It's not willing to rein in Israel. And Israel is essentially going ahead and trying to do whatever it wants. If at all Saudi Arabia were to sign the Abraham Accords and recognize Israel, Saudi Arabia would have placed a condition that two-state solution should be implemented. Palestine should be recognized and set up as a country. Without that, Saudi Arabia was unlikely to accept a peace deal with Israel, though they had a secret relationship between them. So probably such discussions had taken place, but it was all disrupted by the October 7th attacks and the Israeli response after that. So now Israel is saying that they will wipe out Palestine. They will capture both Gaza and West Bank. That's what Netanyahu says. There are calls in Israel, especially by some of the extremist factions, the Zionist factions, to remove Palestinians from the territory itself. This is unacceptable to Saudi Arabia. It is unacceptable to the other Islamic states in the region because two-state solution was mandated by the UN as the only viable solution for the Israel-Palestine problem. So things were getting complicated for Saudi Arabia. So that explains why Saudi is moving away from US, because until then it depended on US security guarantees, believing US would always come to its protection. US has supplied weapons to Saudi Arabia as well, largely based on their oil trade and their strategic energy based relationship. But now that US is less interested here, it has given a free hand to Israel, and Israel is essentially breaking all the established norms. The time had come for Saudi Arabia to make a stand of its own, and that probably explains why Saudi Arabia has taken this decision. That's why the timing of the agreement is very crucial. Though reports indicate the talks were going on for many months, the trigger would have been Israeli attack in Doha, in Qatar, where the sovereignty of a fellow Arab nation was breached blatantly, and there have been no consequences on Israel for this. That is why Saudi Arabia is seeking a security shield of its own. It's relying back on its traditional security partner, which is Pakistan. So the overall impact on West Asia could be probably that the tensions could rise further with this agreement. If at all, Saudi Arabia were to bring in Pakistani military presence to deal with the Israeli threat or to deal with other threats such as the Houthis. Saudi Arabia has been fighting the Houthi rebels in Yemen for many years, from almost a decade. Though it has struck a peace deal with Houthis, the abilities of the Houthis has grown significantly. Today they have significant missile and drone capabilities, and they are blatantly launching attacks against Israel as well. So Saudi would like to secure its own interests, be it to deal with Israeli aggression or to deal with outfits like the Houthis, and Pakistan could be the ideal partner for these objectives. And if necessary, to build nuclear deterrence. Because Saudi also would have noted how US and Israel bombed Iran's nuclear facilities. Though Saudi would be happy about it, that Iran's nuclear weapons program has been set back, it would have realized that probably at some point in the future it would require a nuclear deterrence of its own. So if Pakistan is willing to trade its nuclear shield for money, then Saudi Arabia would go for it. As I told you earlier, Saudi Arabia's strategy has always been to buy, not build a nuclear weapon if at all necessary. So there may not be an actual transfer of nuclear weapons. Pakistan may never actually give a few weapons to Saudi Arabia. But this agreement creates that deterrence, that impact. It creates that support for Saudi Arabia so that it can deal with Israeli aggression, keep Iran aside, and also deal with the rising aspirations of Turkey. On one hand, Turkey is rising as a major power with its own interests, with its own policy, and this allows Saudi Arabia to navigate these difficult times, be it with Israel, be it with Turkey, be it with Iran, and all the other players in the region. So, with the backing of Pakistan's nuclear shield, Saudi's position would be strengthened. That explains why this agreement has been signed. So, definitely, the geopolitics of West Asia is churning. You're seeing new developments happening every single day. Now, coming to the big question, what would be the impact of this on Indian interests? Now, because of this agreement, the principle of collective defense, since Pakistan will provide military support to Saudi in case it is attacked, would it mean the other way around as well? Would it mean that Saudi would come in to support and back Pakistan with direct military support and diplomatic support when Pakistan is fighting a war? That is the next big question we need to ask, because Pakistan has standing issues and tensions with India. We have recently fought a conflict during Operation Sindoor as well. So, if such a scenario were to develop again, let's imagine hypothetically, let's say there's another major attack on India by a terror group sponsored by Pakistan. India retaliates and the tensions will escalate quickly, turning into a military conflict. Would Saudi Arabia directly step in because of this agreement? Pakistan would invoke the principle of collective defense under the agreement. So, does that mean will Saudi Arabia step in to provide the direct military support to go to war against India? Would Saudi ever take that kind of a risk against India? So, to understand this, we need to look at India Saudi relations, a brief history, a brief understanding of our ties with Saudi Arabia. See, please don't forget, India and Saudi Arabia, our relationship goes way back. We share civilizational ties with each other. right? We are bound by geography. The Arabian Sea forms that link between the Arab states and the Indian civilization, with a rich history of trade, cultural exchange, and a common religious connection through Islam. For Muslims in India, the Hajj pilgrimage is of great sacred significance. In fact, India receives one of the highest quotas from Saudi Arabia for Hajj Yatra, which enables the Indian government to facilitate the Hajj pilgrimage for the Muslim community to visit Mecca and Medina. So we have very strong cultural, religion based ties, geographical linkages, very close trade and economic partnership. And today we have seen a complete transformation which is happening. And both the countries have a strategic partnership between the two. So let's see what kind of partnership do we have. See, before 2010, our relationship with Saudi Arabia was slightly different. Post 2010, the relationship is slightly different. I want you to understand this point. Prior to 2010, let's say from 1947 to 2010, India had a lot of dependency on Saudi Arabia. Why? Because of oil. India, which didn't have sufficient hydrocarbon reserves to secure its energy interests, we had to rely on Saudi Arabia as it was the top oil supplier. In fact, even today, in most of the years, Saudi Arabia is amongst the top three oil suppliers to India. In some years, it's at the number one position. Now, recently, Russia has overtaken it. Some years, Iraq might be ahead, but Saudi Arabia is definitely in the top three, second or third position. Almost 18% of our crude oil requirement of the total crude oil imports of India is met by Saudi Arabia. Is that clear? So prior to 2010, when India was still an emerging economy, and especially before the 1990s, when India was still a struggling economy, we had a lot of dependency on the Saudis and the other Arab states for protecting our energy interests, our energy security. So they looked at India as just a buyer of their oil, nothing else. They thought there is nothing else they could gain from India, that India is just buying oil from them. If not India, others would buy their oil. So it was India which had dependency on them, not the other way around. So in a way, it was a very unequal relationship. But post 2010, in the last 20, I would say 25 years, we have seen a very big change and very big transformation that has happened. Today, Saudi Arabia looks at India as an equal and a critical partner, not just in the economic domain, but in the strategic military domain as well. So this is what we will understand in the next few minutes. Saudi Arabia remains a key oil supplier to us. We have a very large trading relationship. India is the second largest trading partner for Saudi Arabia after China. So do you think Saudi Arabia would abandon its trade ties with India for the sake of Pakistan? And don't forget, all the West Asian monarchs, they are very smart businessmen, right? So they would never ever compromise a critical trade relationship. For India, Saudi Arabia is the fifth largest trading partner. So neither country can take the chance of derailing this important relationship. The Indian community in Saudi Arabia not only forms a very close bond between the two countries, but they create a unique leverage for India. Close to 2.6 million Indians are employed in Saudi Arabia. According to latest migration data, the number is close to 3 million right now, somewhere in the range of 2.6 to 3 million Indians. So estimates believe that the Indian community is much larger in size in Saudi Arabia compared to the Pakistani diaspora community. Lots of Indians, they find employment, the blue collar jobs in hospitality sector, construction, oil industry, etc. A lot of Indian professionals like bankers, lawyers, financial experts, then accountants, software engineers, they're all finding lucrative offers in Saudi Arabia. And it makes it is a very important part of our relationship. The community here sends back remittances back home, which is crucial for India's economic stability. The remittances we get from the Gulf, from Saudi Arabia in particular, is a key part of bridging our current account deficit. Now, do you know in which country in West Asia do we have the largest diaspora community? Can you mention that in the comments? Right? We are just talking about Saudi Arabia here, but across the West Asia Arab region, in which of the country do we have the largest diaspora population? So which country is that? Please let me know in the comments. So the point I'm trying to make here is that India, Saudi have a mutual dependency right now. It's not just India which depends on Saudi for getting jobs for Indians, for Indian workers. Saudi economy is also dependent on it because Indian workers, Indian labor force has become the backbone of the economy of all the West Asian countries. You see the same situation in, let's say, Qatar, in Bahrain, in UAE, in Oman. Most of the working population there, they're largely Indians, acting as the backbone of these economies. And Saudi Arabia would never do anything to destroy this relationship. So this again creates a unique leverage point. Now, what is this big shift I'm talking about? Why is 2010 so important? What happened here? It all begins in 2008, November. The deadly 26/11 Mumbai attacks, something that changed geopolitics. India not only witnessed one of the largest ever terror attacks carried out by Lashkar-e-Toiba, sponsored directly by Pakistan, but for the first time, Lashkar was looking to specifically target Western citizens, those who were holding American passports, British passports. So as a result of this attack, US and European powers became more serious about fighting Pakistan-backed terror groups such as Lashkar, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, and the others. Until then, honestly, they were not fully backing India when it came to fighting terrorism. Though US was working with India in counterterrorism from 2001, I explained this yesterday as well. The American counter-terror cooperation was more focused on countering Al-Qaeda, countering Taliban, as they were a threat to them. Whereas they weren't willingly backing India, giving us complete support to counter Pakistani-backed anti-India terror groups like Lashkar and Jaish. But 26/11 attack would change everything. From here onwards, US would become more serious about working with India, even European powers and their intelligence agencies. They would work much closer with India. So this would bring pressure on Saudi Arabia and UAE to transform the relationship with India. Because USA holds a lot of leverage on Saudi and UAE. A lot of terrorist modules were based out of these two countries, which were cultivated by Pakistan's ISI. There were few wanted terrorists that we were looking for. There were few terror groups that we wanted to dismantle, such as the Indian Mujahideen, a domestic Indian terror organization completely backed and nurtured by the Pakistani deep state. IM modules were based in Saudi and UAE. So with the help of US and with the help of these West Asian powers, India managed to bring down these terror modules and terrorist entities. This transformation happened because of one very, very important visit. In 2006, the King of Saudi Arabia had visited India, signing the Delhi Declaration. This was followed up in 2010 by then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, who signed the Riyadh Declaration with Saudi Arabia. The Riyadh Declaration is one very, very important document. This essentially transformed the ties between India and Saudi Arabia, elevating it to the strategic level. And from here onwards, Saudi Arabia took a more balanced position. It started sharing intelligence with India. It started running joint covert operations with UAE and India to break these terror modules as there was American pressure on them. So we saw a complete shift in counterterrorism, and India could dismantle these terror networks and get hold of wanted terrorists. They were even extradited by these countries back to India. Not only this, in the economic domain, Saudi Arabia saw India as a great, stable, reliable partner. India had emerged by then, or India was the fastest growing economy, and especially following the 2008 recession, Saudi Arabia saw the Indian economy as a bright spot, as a good investment destination. Because all these Arab monarchs, they sit on huge piles of petrodollars, the wealth they have earned, the trillions of dollars they have earned by selling hydrocarbons. They want some good place to invest, to reap the benefits and profits out of it. So what better investment destination than India for them? They realized the market size of India. They realized India's progress in technology, in research and development, how the two countries can collaborate in the field of information technology, even in the domain of civilian nuclear technology, in the domain of space, with regard to healthcare, with regard to emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence, clean and renewable energy. In fact, Aramco, one of the world's largest companies and the largest oil company, which is owned by the Saudi royal family, has been looking to make big investments in India. It was supposed to enter into a deal with India's Reliance Industries. Unfortunately, the deal didn't go through. But despite that, Aramco is investing in a massive refinery facility in Ratnagiri in Maharashtra, coastal Maharashtra. Saudi Arabia has helped India to build and develop the strategic petroleum reserves of India, the Indian Strategic Petroleum Reserve Project, where we are building massive underground facilities to store oil to create a buffer stock. Saudi Arabia is the one with UAE which has helped India by providing reliable supplies. So our trade has grown immensely. India supplies essential medicines and food items. Saudi Arabia provides the much needed oil and other essential resources. So this is a mutually beneficial partnership, a very strong trade partnership that neither country would be willing to compromise. Saudi Arabia is investing in our infrastructure sector. They're investing in our markets, in Indian companies, in Indian startups. Their sovereign fund has investments in Indian startups, in the Indian tech ecosystem. So they are looking at India for technology, for research, for manpower, and as well as for collaboration in important domains. What will they get from Pakistan, apart from the security support and the promise of a nuclear umbrella, right? So most likely, Saudi Arabia would like to strike a balance. If you ask me what is my assessment of the deal, I think it is highly unlikely that Saudi would abandon India. This is not going to happen. You might have seen some exaggerated reports in Indian media, especially on our TV news channels, right, who go on a shouting match. But trust me, they have a very poor understanding of what's happening. If you ask any well known expert, they are all of the opinion that this agreement may not directly impact India to the extent that we are anticipating. But of course, we can't be caught off guard. I mean, we can't be complacent. If you look at the response of the Ministry of External Affairs, it has been a very cautious, measured response. India has said that yes, we are aware of the deal. They have formalized their age old defense partnership, so it's nothing new. It's nothing new per se. It already existed in an informal manner. Now they have just formalized it. So India has said we are carefully studying the implications. So India knows very well that we have now created a trust-based partnership with Saudi and as well as with UAE. Strong economic ties, strategic ties. Believe it or not, India, Saudi also have very, very strong military relations today. We conduct multiple joint military exercises between our armies and navies. We also have very close intelligence sharing arrangement. Our intelligence agencies, RAW and IB, they very, very closely collaborate with Saudi intelligence. We have been part of joint operations to dismantle terror networks in the region. So this speaks volumes about the strategic partnership that we also share with Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia is unlikely to compromise that. So what we can anticipate is that maybe this agreement is more about sending a message to Israel. Saudi alliance with Pakistan, the formalization of their defense partnership, is more to send a message to Israel and as well as to United States. But yes, if tensions were to escalate between India and Pakistan, Saudi Arabia might get involved, if not militarily, maybe diplomatically. And we saw this happening during Operation Sindoor. I don't know if you have noticed this. During Operation Sindoor, especially on 8th, 9th, and 10th of May, when the tensions were at its peak, Saudi foreign minister visited both Islamabad and Delhi, back-to-back visits. There has been a lot of speculation regarding those visits. Maybe there was a back channel which had been opened between India and Pakistan via Saudi Arabia, with Saudi acting as a sort of a mediator. So Saudi Arabia might play some sort of a diplomatic role if at all there are tensions between India and Pakistan. But it is unlikely that Saudi Arabia would go against India completely. Because after 2010, on the Kashmir issue, Saudi Arabia has almost taken a neutral stand. I told you, right? Previously, they were voting against India in favor of Pakistan. But in the last 15 years, they usually abstain from those votes when Pakistan brings up Kashmir, Article 370 or Citizenship Amendment Act to interfere with our internal matters. Saudi Arabia, UAE, both of them, they're abstaining from these votes at Organization of Islamic Cooperation and also at the UN. This shows their balanced approach towards India and the slight tilt they are showing towards India. So they would like to maintain that balance going forward. So I strongly believe India would also maintain that balance, be it with Israel, with Iran, with Saudi Arabia, the three poles of West Asia. We will maintain our balance. We have been walking this diplomatic tightrope from 70 plus years. India has enough experience in handling these different powers. So, in my assessment, this deal is significant. 100%. It's a very important deal. It might have implications for West Asia. It might strengthen Saudi posture against Israel and US, but it is highly unlikely that Saudi Arabia would go directly against India in case of an India-Pakistan conflict. Maybe some sort of diplomatic involvement, some sort of a mediation maybe through the back channels, but nothing more than that. So with this analysis, I bring my discussion to an end. Now I leave you with two practice questions. Take up this prelims practice question. India, Saudi Arabia are part of which of the following military exercises? Tada, Tanseek, Nasim, Al-Bahar, Al-Mohid, Al-Hindi. So I will leave this for you. I'm not going to give you the answer. I want you to read about this and give me the right answer in the comments below. Then please look at the mains question. India's relations with Saudi Arabia has deepened over the last 2 decades and is beyond disruption. Critically examine in the context of recent developments. So the question is focused on India-Saudi ties, the strategic ties, but it is referring to the disruption that has happened recently, which is basically a reference to the security agreement between Saudi and Pakistan. It's asking you what will be the impact of this. Will this security agreement disrupt India-Saudi relations? Yes or no? So, as I explained, you can always take a stand that it's highly unlikely that Saudi Arabia would be willing to risk its strategic ties with India, its trade and defense partnership with India, right? So based on what we have discussed, please try to write an answer for this question, practice your answer writing. And if you like the session, if you understood whatever we have discussed, please support us so that we can bring more and more such classes for you. And the only way you can support us is through likes, through comments, share the video with other aspirants, and without fail, subscribe to our channel. That is it. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.